Let's Get To presents Go Go Astros, a focus on H-Town hardball.
And welcome back to Let's Get To presents the Go Astros show presented by Twitchy Dolphin Media. You know, that's a lot of titles for a show that makes us all zero money, but
it's right up there with Darrell K. Royal Field on Joe Jamel Stadium, Ricky Williams, Vince Young Plaza, Taco Bell scoreboard.
I can't wait till I'm sitting in the Ricky Williams seats at blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you're right. You know, it's funny, guys, because there's oftentimes, I think, because I'm older, not older than you guys, but we're the same age, but I also come from the military where things are very black and white. It's very easy to see what a thing is. And so I can't wrap my head around the fact that these Mariner fans can be so excited winning one out of their previous 7 games against the Astros and somehow come away thinking that's fine. So Andy, I want you to comment on this first, because I think sometimes this is where your as you call yourself curmudgeon-y attitude really comes into play. But I just don't understand, how do you not recognize you got your ass whipped and go home?
And admittedly, everything I'm about to say is based on my Twitter interactions with Mariners fans.
Fair.
Not real life interactions, because as we all know, Twitter is not real. However, having said that, that's what I have to go on. They are a delusional, desperate fan base. And I mean this in the nicest possible way. If we had not made the playoffs in the last 21 years, and not only not made the playoffs, but been really, really bad for the bulk of those 21 years, we would all be pretty pissy about it as well. But they've kind of taken it to a new level, especially this weekend. I think that what pushed me over the edge and just made me push away from the computer was watching the mental gymnastics trying to justify George Kirby throwing at Jose Altuve. That wasn't an accident. This is a guy that's walked 3 batters up until that game this season. And the first pitch is at the shoulders below the skull. That's a purpose pitch. Own it if that's what you're going to do. It made no sense to do it, because even Julio Rodriguez, who got hit the night before, admitted it wasn't intentional. And guess what? I swung at the pitch and got hit. Sucks. And it sucked for Julio Rodriguez because nobody wants to see him get hurt. Nobody was laughing about it. Nobody was cheering like you would have seen in T-Mobile Park like a week ago, the last time they hit Jose Altuve. But just in general, they seem to have no sense of their place. Sounds really bad, but how the season has fallen out so far. They won 14 games in a row to have a chance at the second wild card. That's have they not gone on a historic streak for them without really playing anybody, I think, except for the Blue Jays during that 14 games, we'd still be talking about them being a seller at this point. Instead, they've got they made a good deal, and good for them, but it doesn't address their problem of not being able to hit, and it doesn't address the problem that they don't seem to be all that healthy, and it doesn't address the problem that they just don't win games against good teams.
Brian, before we get to you on your take on that, I think one of every Astros fan's favorite follows, at least one of mine, Archbishop Deshais, had a lot of fun with it last night, pointing out a couple of historical occurrences that happened the last time the Mariners made the playoffs. For example, Steely Dan won a Grammy for Album of the Year the last season the Mariners made the playoffs. And the Mariners they've lost 5 of 6 of the Astros. They haven't made the playoffs since Rachel was pregnant in season 8 of Friends. So yeah, it's been a minute. Chime in on that. But also, I mean, I also agree with Andy. I think that pitch was hit on purpose. And just the mental gymnastics of that, to be okay with it, like he said. But also, we're going to get to Scott Servais in a second, because I find myself increasingly disappointed. But yeah, I mean, your thoughts on the first pitch and just on sort of this reaction to, frankly, getting your ass handed to you.
Yeah. One reason we know that Rafael Montero was not throwing at Julio Rodriguez, it was the 10th pitch of the at-bat.
Right.
you'd probably, pick a pitch. If you're going to throw at somebody, you'd probably pick a pitch is going to happen in the at-bat. That's usually it. That's why George
It's all
Kirby
part of
did
the
it on
plan, Brian.
first pitch. He wasn't going to wait for the 10th pitch because, he may have walked the guy by then. But Andy's right here. If you haven't gone to the playoffs in 21 years, frankly, they were close last year, but that's the first time they've been close since the early 2000s. The fact I saw about how long it's been. Also, what happened in September of 2001, the iPod came out.
And I just got the 13th iteration, so that tells you something.
Well, you know what I was doing this weekend? I was moving my 20-year-old out of his apartment in Austin. You want to know what didn't exist 21 years ago? My 20-year-old.
It's been a minute for the Mariners fans, and most people tend to have sympathy for them, so it's been weird watching them try to burn that away with just not being able to. Hey, you have a team that's finally good and looks like it's going to get in the playoffs. You have this really exciting young player. I get why you're frustrated. I'm frustrated as a baseball fan that Julio Rodriguez is on the IL because he is a really, new to be a good player. He's a really fun player. And I won't like facing him, but 18 times a year. But in the other games, I will very much enjoy watching him play. And so it's a disappointment he's not going to New York this weekend or not on the active roster this week for the Mariners. But look, one reason you don't hit the first player of the game is because, he came around to score a run that turned out to be really critical. And if you're only a couple games up in the wild card, that may matter more. Noted thing that I think I'm going to add to this too is, that I know that pitch was intentional. That pitch was intentional. And I guarantee you every umpire in that game knew that pitch was intentional. They didn't issue warnings. Why didn't they issue warnings? Because, look, if the Astros want to come out next inning and throw at a guy in the butt, then we, hit a guy, then we will issue warnings. We kind of have to, for the sake of baseball etiquette, give them a chance. The Astros never did that. Okay? Despite the fact, last game of the season against the Mariners, it's not like we're going to win this game, but we'll get you in September when it doesn't matter. Last game of the season, in part because the Astros, didn't want to get in the beanball war because, getting your players hurt is not a good strategy for October. And we saw that, right? They put Jordan on the disabled list around the All-Star break to give him some rest. It cost him a chance to go to the home run derby, right? Julio Rodriguez went to the home derby, did great, had a great, was fun to watch, right? Then was out for the Astros series, a key series for them afterwards. One thing the Astros are doing, and hey, this is veteran ball club, veteran manager, eyes on the prize here, right? We are focused on the right thing here, and we're not involved in your pettiness.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you both hit the nail on the head with that. One of the things, and it's funny because I tend to be a bit more, I think, lead with my heart on this show, and I tend to find reasons to like and root for every single former Astro. I thought it was cool when we were managing against Brad Ausmus. I will never hate George Springer, and on and on and on. Scott Servais has done his best to burn every bridge with the fans that still remember the fact that, he was kind of a long-term part of this team in the franchise's history. Brian, fill us in on, just what was it seemed like he had a motivation to do it. And I just can't for my life of me figure out what that was.
It's an old school baseball thing, right? If you hit one of ours, we have to hit one of yours, which I think was also the philosophy.
Right. And I don't want to interrupt you, but that's one instance. Barking at he was barking at the Doug, like he was doing his best to get Minute Maid Park to want to beat his ass.
And he's done that several times, both in this series and like if you look at that brawl they had with the Angels, which was caused by the Angels. And by the way, Scott Servais is not the biggest red ass manager in the American League West. It's Phil Nevin, but that's a high bar Phil Nevin's getting over.
Former Astro Phil Nevin. What are we doing? What were we doing in the early 2000s or late 90s, early 2000s?
Well, clearly we should have been drafting Derek Jeter instead. And I looked up Servais yesterday. We apparently should have drafted Marquise Grissom, who went a few picks later, rather than Servais. But Servais was a no pun intended, serviceable player. He's better than Scott Servais, the pitcher, who spells his name the other way. But, it seems Chet Bannister was like this as the Rangers manager. I have to sort of be fiery to fire up my team. It didn't seem to last for long with Bannister. It's been real interesting to me how long Servais has sort of been at this with the Mariners. And, apparently they like that in their they like that in their manager. Not my cup of tea. Yeah.
Andy?
Certainly we should have taken Ed Taubenzy over him back in '94, though. That's my opinion on that now.
But we replaced both of them with Brad Ausmus eventually, which seemed to work out for us. Servais he's got the red ass, as Brian says, but it's kind of like he has read a How to Motivate Your Team book that was written in 1963. Like Earl Weaver had some time on his hands. And this is how you do it. And
he's saying he follows the Church of Vince Lombardi or something like that.
But all of it yesterday felt so forced and fake to me. Like I've got a young team who's very clearly intimidated by this team that we're playing that has beat us 3, 4, 5 of the first 6 we've played since the All-Star break, and are beating us right now, that I've got to come out and keep them fired up and motivated. And if I get tossed, that's going to put it's just nonsense. And I also think there's probably some truth to the fact that Scott Servais, as long as he's been with the Mariners, they haven't made the playoffs. And so if they don't make the playoffs this year, he's probably not managing them next year. So there's probably a little bit of urgency on his part to, I like Seattle. I've already got my house paid for. I don't have to fight the real estate battles in the Pacific Northwest. So I'd like to stay if I could. And I get paid pretty well for not doing that much. It's the American League. I don't have to make decisions.
The very fact that it seemed fake to me, and it wasn't even this series, it was the series right out of the All-Star break in Seattle, when he seemed to be wanting to challenge Dusty Baker, the person who everyone in baseball seems to like, to a fist fight. And it was like, and first of all, I think Dusty, even at 70 something, could take Scott Servais, but it just seemed like, I don't know. I think to your point, Andy, it seemed like, here's my check off list in the managerial checkbook of what I'm supposed to do to manage a team.
If there had been grease paint available, you would have seen all the kabuki theater that he was trying to put on, because it was just nonsense. And I don't even think his team buys into it. I think he's got enough talent that they don't need to pull that kind of stuff. Yesterday was weird because we decided to stop hitting after the first inning, and he was basically running out a AAA team for the most part. And they still hung in. They're a good team. They're very likely going to break their playoff drought. I'm going to laugh hysterically if they don't, but they're very likely going to end up with one of those wild card spots. He needs to be focused more on in-game management and not in-game theatrics. I think that's the bottom line for Scott Servais, because I can't see anybody else really getting excited about hiring him if this whole Seattle thing doesn't work out after this season.
Brian, you want to add anything to that as we wrap this particular topic up?
Yeah. The Astros have a 12-game lead over the Mariners and don't have to play them again for the rest of the season. I'm happy not to think about Scott Servais until October.
If October. I mean, the fact is that the Mariners still have, and I don't know, obviously we're going to get to the trade deadline. Teams might look a lot different tomorrow when we wake up and Wednesday when we do our wrap-up show, but they still have 7 games against the Guardians, who is a half a game behind them. Mm-hmm. They have a lot more to worry about than the team in blue and orange from Houston, Texas. We'll start with Andy on this first one. I'm sure you can see that I serpentine you guys. I give you guys each the first day. Okay. Andy, I think one of the things that came clear to me yesterday was the Astros need, not only do they want or have the luxury of hoping to have, they need something in the outfield that produces offensively, despite his slump, not named Kyle Tucker. Jake Myers had some of the worst at-bats I've seen in a really long time. He looks overmatched. He's not playing particularly good defense either. It's almost like if you're going to have that offensive production, put Servais out there, because at least he seems to be able to play some defense. Where do you sit on the Astros outfield, especially in light of the fact that it seems like Yuli's actually, I know it's a small sample size, but has taken to the second hole pretty well?
So here's my issue with Kyle Tucker is going to be Kyle Tucker. Kyle Tucker does not hit in April or July. No one knows why, but that seems to be a thing. I don't know if it's a moon phase issue. His zodiac sign doesn't allow him to hit there. He was born in the sign of the. I don't know what any of that is, but he doesn't
like Easter eggs or 4th of July fireworks.
It could be, but he sure does hit in August and September, which we're all hoping continues to be a trend this year. I'm not worried about Kyle Tucker. The problem, it happens to be in the outfield, but the bottom third of our lineup is really, really bad offensively.
It's abysmal.
To the point that you don't really have to pay attention because anything they do to get on base is a kind of mild surprise, but there's not a lot of surprises coming out of there.
I'll even throw some numbers, even though it's Brian's job. I believe they are the 28th ranked bottom third of the order in baseball.
Yeah. It's not pretty. I think some of that is Dusty's mismanagement earlier in the year of thinking that Siri and McCormick needed to be platooned in center field for some reason, even though McCormick is clearly a better player all around. Siri might be slightly better defensively, and I'm sure there's some metric that proves that Siri is valuable in that respect, but McCormick is a better hitter. Even though he's not hitting right-handed pitching that well this year, he's a better all-around player. If the Astros have to make one move, we've got to find somebody who can hit that we can sit in left field, because I don't believe Michael Brantley's coming back, and I don't believe we're going to hear about it until Wednesday. The shoulder issue with no timeline is always a big concerning thing for a guy, especially his age.
Yeah, even the broadcast started to mention that possibility yesterday, and to watch Astros Twitter, who clearly isn't watching this show, seemed completely shocked by the possibility.
But the problem is, I don't know, and really anything would be an improvement at this point over what we're doing in left field right now, but I don't know that there's just that many corner outfielders that are available for what we want to give up. And I mean, you don't necessarily want to give Luis Garcia, with his 3 years remaining of club control, relatively low salary, and relatively good performance, up for a 3-month rental if you don't have to. I know there's some thought that Josh Bell could play left field. Well, if you acquire Josh Bell, I think he's played 9 games in left field in his career, not just this season, but just at all. And that's on a really bad Nationals team that has had to mix and match to just put a lineup out. So I don't know that there are immediate solutions, but if they have to make one, if they're going to make just one deal, and I think there's probably a couple coming down the pipe, if they're just making one, they need to find somebody who can hit, that can be serviceable in left field, put McCormick in center, deal with that, and hope Yuli continues a mini renaissance. Even if he is just a number 2 slap hitter to move Altuve over, that's a role that he hasn't been able to play this year. So I think that's something, if he can adjust to that, and he seemed to be able to do that against the Mariners, if that carries over, I'm less concerned about first base. Ideally, there'd be some other changes.
Brian, to his point, now I just want a center fielder or somebody in the outfield that can actually just make contact and maybe move a runner. I mean, Myers swung at 3 balls out of the zone when we could have won the game earlier there. Your thoughts on that outfield position? And then I want you to pivot too, and just what you think will come from these rumors of trading either Odorizzi or Garcia, and where all that falls.
Yeah. So first thought on sort of the outfield. Yeah, Jake Myers is really struggling, and he's really struggling with his approach at the plate and swing and miss. So there's a good chance he's in Sugarland by the middle of the week, either from an acquisition or just go down there and hit the ball, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. But so they could find an outfielder to play. They could find someone to play the corner outfield, maybe a right-handed hitter that sort of could platoon with the sort of lefty bats that are there. It's harder to find a center fielder that would work. Because the center fielders on the market, we've talked about this before, tend to be pretty high value because they have multiple years of control, and none of the teams feel they need to trade them the way. Hey, the Nationals need to trade Josh Bell because, otherwise they just let him play for 2 months on a 65-win team and say bye in the offseason. They're better off getting a deal for him right now. Not the case with, say, the Pirates and Brian Reynolds, who it looks like they're not going to trade because, hey, you need to blow them away to do that. And that's part of what's inspiring the talk about potentially trading a starting pitcher. And as I mentioned before, if we trade a starting pitcher, we talked about this possibility before, it would be for someone who, you go read a list of the most likely guys to get traded. It's not going to be on that list because it would be someone who has multiple years that they're looking for someone who can play this year, but also would be the starting left fielder next year when Brantley's contract expires, and they need to find someone to do that. So there could be a possibility for that. It's a little harder to see because it's not sort of a defined list of people on what it is, and where they have a surplus is in starting pitching. Now, Jake Odorizzi has been mentioned specifically with the Cardinals, and I think that rumor came out of St. Louis. I think it was reported by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter. It kind of makes sense in the sense that the Cardinals really need exactly what Jake, really just need some starting pitchers who can take the ball every fifth day, get them 5 or 6 innings, may not be 7 shutout like we saw yesterday. And, in order to trade Jake Odorizzi, I think they would have to send cash out, particularly because he's owed either a buyout at the end of the season, which is essentially a way to get around to sort of manipulate their way around the salary cap back in last season when they were really sort of concerned about that. So there'll be cash involved in the deal, but essentially that money is spent, even though they haven't spent it yet. And we shouldn't regard that as a big deal. The sort of other parts to note here is we've seen a lot of rumors about the Astros more this year than we've seen in a really long time.
Yeah, you mentioned that on Twitter the other day.
Yeah, I don't quite know what to make of that other than to note it, but also a lot of what is mentioned is just, hey, the front office, right, doing due diligence here. What are the various scenarios that we can do to try to get something? Could we, if we offered the Mariners Julio Rodriguez for, Luis Garcia for Julio Rodriguez, if they took it, sure, right, or some sort of like deal like that, right? Pitching maybe, that. So they may be just sort of floating some ideas. I have no idea how sort of solid this is, how much traction there is on any of these things. It's just different that there's so much out.
Andy, what do you think of the leaks? I mean, is it just that Luno, like Click runs a less tight ship than Luno did?
I don't necessarily think they're leaks as much as it is just a recognition that we have more holes in our lineup than we have had in 6 years. You logically could make a case, especially from the outside, of replacing our starting catcher, our starting first baseman, our starting center fielder, and our starting left fielder. If those deals were available and you're just looking at it from a pure number standpoint, I could find better guys at each one of those positions. Now, we know as Astros fans, we're not going to get rid of Martin Maldonado, and he's probably going to come back next year because we really like the value that he brings outside of his batting average. Yuli is a tough emotional piece, and I think there's a strategic piece too, because his presence on the Astros, even though it didn't get his brother on the team, which was part of the original intent, has gotten a lot of other Cuban players signed. That value becomes less if there is an international draft put in place, but right now it's very important for the Astros that Yuli is part of the organization. The other 2 holes, you could chunk Siri, Myers, and McCormick in a bag, throw them in the river, and I don't think anybody outside of their relatives would be horribly, horribly upset. But so I think it's a lot of just guys putting things together from a standpoint of, well, they need this and they have this, so they're probably going to try to deal for that. I'm not thrilled about some of the things we've been mentioned in. I like the Josh Bell deal if it can happen. He is not a good defensive first baseman. Yuli hasn't been a good defensive first baseman this year. But Josh Bell, if I'm taking track records, I like Yuli's track record a whole lot more than I like Josh Bell's track record, even though this year has been his best year as a defensive player. And that's a big deal when you're talking about one of the advantages the Astros typically have is defense that is better than the people they've faced in the playoffs. That's what got us to the World Series last year. It's what failed us when we faced the Rays in the 2020 season.
Right.
But, having said that, I don't think we're in on Wilson Contreras, even though everybody wants us to be. That it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to get that guy and let him play 1 every 5 days. and then maybe slide him into a DH role when Jordan's in left field. But how often is that going to happen? Because they're trying to rest his hand. There's a lot of weirdness there. I got excited when we were kind of tied to Josh Hader for a minute, bringing him home.
Yeah.
But then I read why the Brewers might be willing to deal him, and I'm like, he doesn't want to pitch more than three batters at a time ever. Only wants to be used in the ninth inning. And is very vocal about those things. And I don't think the Astros need that sort of thing. And then you're looking at the backup deals like Ji-Man Choi. I'd rather have Yuli playing first because I just don't see the big advantage, especially knowing that Choi doesn't hit left-handed pitching at all. And guess who you be facing with if you have the Yankees coming up in a playoff series? A lot of left-handed pitchers coming at you. Christian Vasquez is interesting from a backup catcher standpoint. I think that might be an upgrade, but again, it's a guy that's going to play one. Maybe if you bring Vasquez in, he plays 2 out of every 5 days, but I don't see it.
Especially for the last couple of months when things are pretty sewn up.
Yeah. So I like the idea that if we're going to trade one of our starting pitchers, especially one of the young guys, I think we owe is a weird word. I like the idea of Odorizzi going to the Cardinals. I don't think we get terribly much back that's going to help us in return, but I like the idea of giving that guy a solid because he's not in our long-term plans. The Cardinals can use him, and the Cardinals, frankly, need him. So maybe they overpay slightly and we get a better AAA piece than we would have normally. But for the rest of them, the ones that are under club control for the next 2, 3, 4 years, you've got to get a long-term piece out of that. And it'll be interesting to see how much Click sticks to his guns. And how much he weathers the storm, especially if he doesn't make a deal. Because Astros fans will lose their minds.
Oh,
We
yeah.
can lose our minds for 6 days, even though these things never happen until the Monday or the 2 days before the trade dedeadline.
Especially in
Very
Astros
early.
history, the Verlander deal and the Greinke deal are examples of things that
Right.
happen with minutes to go.
So it'll be interesting how the next 48 hours play out. I think the Astros make a deal. What the deal is your guess is as good as mine.
Well, Brian, where do you see that? And I know there's been a lot of talk of bullpen help, and I don't think it's to help Ryan Presley because he had a bad game. But the Maton's not been consistent. I think Abreu has actually pitched pretty well, but just where do you see any potential deals coming if there are any?
Yeah, every team in baseball every contender in baseball could use another guy in the bullpen. It's also in October, bullpens matter more. And having an extra arm out there you trust is a useful thing because your starters, look, it'd be great, right, if your starters win 7 shutout, but in the playoffs, they're going to go 2 times through the order and the 3rd time through the order penalty. The Yankees, Brad Judge lead off a lot for that reason. And so an extra bullpen arm would be fine. It wouldn't cost you all that much, and you could probably clear a spot off the 40-man roster. I mean, look, the advantage of Josh Bell is he's the best hitter on the market, and they have to fit him into the lineup, but that would work. They could figure out ways to make that work, and that would boost the offense. I think that's the most likely is they get a first baseman because it's harder to see them getting a center fielder. They could well get a corner outfielder, but those are the positions I think they're most likely to get someone out. Worth noting, sort of globally, prices seem to be high, and certainly the Mariners paid a really high price. By some measures, they overpaid and gave up a really good prospect, their best prospect in Noelvi Marte in the deal to get Luis Castillo, which is an issue for the AL West in 2023, but he's not signed past 2023.
Right. Andy, what is a successful trade deadline for you? When we do this wrap-up show on Wednesday, is there any situation that's going to make you ecstatic, and in any situation you think is going to justify Astros Twitter anger?
I guess knowing how travel works and everything else, the Friday lineup I would like to see probably has Josh Bell at first, probably has Yuli DHing way down or maybe he's batting second, has Alvarez in left and McCormick in center, and we've got another bullpen piece. I don't know how you get there. I think that the Alvarez, Bell, Yuli triangle on who plays when, where, knowing that you're giving up defense, that's certainly easier to play Alvarez in Minute Maid Park in left field when Framber Valdez is pitching. And I think there's going to be a lot on Dusty and his staff to put that together competently so you can play defense. Having said that, there's a host of teams in the history of Major League Baseball that have been very successful with people like Greg Luzinski in left field. Alvarez is better than Greg Luzinski was. So there are moves that can be made. It's going to require Dusty to really be on top of his game. We need to get another bat. I think at the end of the day, I'd like to have another bullpen arm, and then figuring out how those pieces work. That's what would make it look good to me.
Brian, out of the following starting pitchers, Odorizzi, Garcia, Valdez, and Urquidy, are all of them on the team on Wednesday? And if not, which ones are not on the team?
My guess is they're all on the team. The most likely to move is Odorizzi, if not to the Cardinals, to another team that just needs an inning eater. I think it's possible, but not over 50% that they trade Garcia or Urquidy. Because those deals are harder to pull off. That may be more of a target for the offseason. But I suspect they're more likely to trade prospects for rentals.
All right. We'll do Brian, you first, then Andy. Is this a World Series team, a World Series winning team as constituted right now, Brian?
I mean, last year an 88 win team that at this point had,
Brian, that's not what I'm asking. You know what I'm asking.
So they're the third most likely team to win the World Series right now. Can they do it with that? Yes. Do they want to improve? Hey, they have a real good opportunity to do that. So also, yes.
Brian getting all semantics with me. I understand. I was there. I saw what happened with an 88 win.
The playoffs are a crapshoot. You cannot.
They are.
I would love to get some players to help and increase the odds. They increase the odds just a little bit. No move that's made by any team. If Juan Soto goes to the Yankees, it'd be a big help. It'd be a big help to the Yankees. It does not guarantee them the World Series, and Juan Soto's not going to the Yankees, by the way.
And Montas might, and we all know how we feel about that, Andy. What about you, man? Do you think, Andy, is this a World Series winning team as constituted right now on August 1st?
Yeah, because the regular season doesn't typically lie. So you've got the second best record in the American League right now. You're a World Series contender, mostly on the strength of our starting pitching. So I think that I would put, even up against the Dodgers, even against the $500 million lineup that they bring to the table, Verlander, Fromber, and Christian Javier as the top three rotation, and be okay with that matchup, whoever's on the other side of it. And that, if the Astros are going to win a World Series and not make any moves, that's what's going to have to happen anyway. So that's where I would put it.
All right. Well, we will be back on Wednesday to hopefully break down we will break down what this trade deadline thing means. Until then, everybody go Astros.
So we play the Red Sox, which means a house divided in my house this week. So wish me luck, everyone. Go Astros.
Go Josh Bell. Pack your bags.
Go Astros is a presentation from Twitchy Dolphin Media and part of the Let's Get To Baseball Network.